The inability for Democrats to think ahead astounds me every time I look at the news. It astounded me every time I looked at the news, every time I found out that Obama had made another executive order. It astounded me when the election was over and everybody in the Democrat Party realized that the president had almost unlimited power and it was somebody that they didn't like. And it astounds me the most because we're back to talking about the Supreme Court. We're getting to a point right now where it's about once a day that Kamala Harris is going on and telling the people that we need to sit back and block the Supreme Court nominations, even though there's no viable or legal way to do so right now. In spite of the fact that the Washington Post has come out and said that the president is not under any sort of federal investigation for Russian collusion, and for the most part, everybody that Mueller is investigating now is just for process crimes that came through the investigation and a few old money laundering charges, such as the Paul Manafort trial that's going on right now. Celebrities and senators alike are out there citing the fact that a president under a federal investigation should not be appointing any sort of Supreme Court justices. And they love to cite the fact that Kavanaugh believes that no president should be indicted while he is sitting, even though that's not Kavanaugh's idea. That came out of the Federalist Papers, and if I'm not mistaken, that came from the hero of the left, Alexander Hamilton himself. It is coming to a point of desperation to Democrats, and they are trying to make this upcoming midterm a single-term election, just as I predicted that they were going to try to do when Kavanaugh first got nominated to begin with. If I may be permitted to make a prediction about what's going to happen with this Supreme Court nomination, I've seen the way that Mitch McConnell does things out in front, and I've seen the way that he treated a Supreme Court nomination that Obama could not get through before the election, no matter what. I've seen this happen, I've seen the writing on the walls, and I predict fully that right before the election, McConnell is going to get the votes and get the vote in and push Kavanaugh through, which he has every legal right to do. There's really nothing bad on Kavanaugh's record. And at which point the Democrats are going to go into the midterms with absolutely nothing to run on. They've been banking on the fact that they can hold off this nomination and confirmation until after the midterm elections, and then the election simply comes down to whether or not there's going to be the Supreme Court vote. But there's a very interesting side conversation that is coming down from the left in the wake of their realization that there's really nothing that they can do to keep Kavanaugh from being confirmed, save from committing violence against certain members of the Senate right now. And I would love to see the contempt of court case that came out of that. I have yet to see an active sitting elected official say anything about this. But I've seen some magazine articles at this point, and I've had some discussion points with people on Discord about the topic. Most of the people that I talk to seem to cite the fact that the left is getting completely desperate when they propose this. But this has been proposed on numerous occasions before from people on both right and left. And I'm talking, of course, about term limits for Supreme Court justices. One of the first things that a blue check celebrity will put on Twitter or Instagram when he or she wants to run down the reputation of Judge Kavanaugh is the fact that, as I mentioned before, they continue to believe that President Trump is under a federal investigation right now, and therefore he should not be allowed to make a lifetime appointment. That's one of the biggest things that they continue to cite when they talk about this, is the fact that this is going to be a lifetime appointment. Many people on the right were urging the president to pick somebody even younger than Kavanaugh. Many of them were urging the president to pick Amy Barrett, who is just a little bit older than I am. At which point her career would probably span at least 50 years on the court. Women generally live past 80 at this point in our society. While I look at the intentions of the people who are on the left currently, and I include the magazine writers, the journalists, and the celebrities that all want to talk about a term limit for the SCOTUS, all that I see when I see any of this come out is a group of very desperate people trying to find some other way to keep Donald Trump's influence from affecting this country on any sort of a long-term basis. In the Vox article that I read, the writer suggested that we have an 8 or a 12-year term for the Supreme Court. Obviously, we're going to want to have it longer than anybody in Congress or the president himself. Judges are generally held in a different standard than elected politicians, but I don't necessarily agree with the fact that an unelected official should be on a court making decisions at the whim of the president that appointed that particular official for a generation beyond that president being in office. Now, I'm going to take a second and circle back to the unelected part in just a moment, but first I want to talk about the term and what I would propose would be the fairest thing for the court and why I feel that way. I often find myself at odds with fellow conservative commentator Ben Shapiro. A lot of the times I think that his ideas and his policy prescriptions don't really align with the spirit of the American people or the Constitution as it was written. As much as he likes to call himself a strict constitutionalist, I really don't see that in any of his commentary. But I think that he is absolutely right on what he said about the Supreme Court, the justices in the Supreme Court, in between the time of Kennedy announcing his retirement and Kavanaugh being nominated. Now, I consider it to be a very good thing that Kennedy was able to retire and enjoy some of his golden years at the end of his life, because the person ahead of him that left the Supreme Court was Justice Scalia. And that was because he died. And there's a lot of talk on both the right and the left about the fact that Justice Ginsburg is pretty much standing on her deathbed and working from the court bench with one foot in the grave. Most of the people believe that she is going to be the next one to leave the court, either by retirement, but more likely due to death. And the whole situation of this becoming a death watch to the Supreme Court, everybody's standing around talking about who's going to die next and who's going to replace the person who dies next, and who's going to get to nominate the person who replaces the person that's going to die next, is incredibly gruesome in my eyes. I don't want to sit and look at justices on the Supreme Courts and wonder when it is that they're going to die. I'd like to sit and listen to the things that they say and the way that they judge. I'd like to sit and read some of their court cases and sit and interpret the reasons that they ruled in the way that they did. Sitting there and waiting for them to die just seems morbid. But the way that our government is set up right now and the way that the Constitution is set up, that's what we're doing. I don't think the Supreme Court should have as much power as it does. The Supreme Court has been legislating from the bench for as long as I've been alive, and even longer than that. And that's a big part of the reason that there is so much talk about who's going to die next and who replaces the person that's going to die next. But that was never the intention of the court. The court is an appeals process for people who feel that they've been wrongly accused or convicted or sued or lost a lawsuit, whatever the case may be. Even to this day, people come out and say that Roe versus Wade was enshrined into law. So with that being said, most of the people in this country feel that they have some sort of skin in the game when they sit and watch who's going to be appointed to the Supreme Court. They feel that the appointee is going to make a law that is going to affect them one day. And this is absolutely wrong. But because I'd rather have the opinions free and clear, and I'd rather just sit there and learn from the people that get appointed to the Supreme Court and learn why they govern the way that they do and appeal the way that they do, I would like to see a good, solid 30-year term for the Supreme Court. I think 30 is going to be the magic number. If you go any sooner than 30, you're just going to be cycling people in and out as fast as we should actually be cycling out Congress people. If you go for 4 years or 8 years, like the people on the left insist that we should be doing right now, there's just no legacy behind it. That's one of the nice things about the way that the Constitution set up the court, is the fact that the president gets to have a legacy for at least a few years beyond his retirement from the presidency and from government. It does put a little bit of skin in the game for the rest of us to make sure that we elect the best possible official that we have to elect. And I really feel that if we give 30 years to a justice sitting on the Supreme Court, he can make the decisions, he can shape the society the way that he wants, and still have some time to go out and enjoy the rest of his life. There will be obviously a good pension from the government for the justices in case that they go through and they live for 50 years beyond retiring from the court. In addition, the 30 years mark prevents some other concerns that came out of this last round of picking a Supreme Court justice and hoping he gets confirmed. So many people on the right were talking about so many people that were younger even than Judge Amy Barrett. I heard one person try and suggest a 23-year-old lawyer to go and be the next Supreme Court justice because that person would have 60 years to push the conservative agenda that most people want Trump to push, and I don't agree with that. It shouldn't be a question of whether or not we're sitting here and trying to put the longest legacy in there. We should be trying to put the best legacy in there. So if we put a finite number, especially a long number, onto the term of the Supreme Court, we don't keep bringing age into the whole situation. We can actually go out and find the best candidates out there and not talk about how old they are. It really is about quality and not quantity when it comes to the Supreme Court. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't really feel like it is right for an unelected official to be in the government for 50 or 60 years. And I want to talk about the process of choosing the Supreme Court justice at this point, because I don't necessarily believe that we are wrong in the way that we do it right now. And I know a lot of people out there do believe that we are wrong at this point too, especially people on the left. I've been on both sides of this argument, and the more I think about it, the more I feel that we're absolutely right. I know that most states right now elect their state Supreme Court justices. I've seen the campaigns. I believe, have a campaign going on in Wisconsin right now for a Supreme Court justice. And I have some misgivings about that now that I think about it more. Congresspeople are elected. Congresspeople are the people who are supposed to be making the law with the representation of the people in mind. The president is elected, and as an elected official, the president is charged with enforcing the laws that the legislation makes, with the will of the people in mind, of course, the people that elected him. The job of the Supreme Court is completely different. Justices on the Supreme Court are charged with interpreting all laws that come out of Congress and the execution of the laws by the presidency as constitutional or not constitutional, with the experience of law and studying the Constitution behind them. They are charged with being advocates of the law, and our intent of having the Supreme Court is that they will read the Constitution as it is written and interpret the law as such. I don't like the idea of these people that are interpreting the law as campaigning to be elected to the position. I liked it at first because I didn't like the fact that they were unelected officials and they were appointees. But the more that I think about it, the more I think we need to have a situation in the Supreme Court where they don't campaign. I'd like to have Supreme Court justices that never expect to sit on the Supreme Court. I would rather have them picked out of the field and be surprised with it, because then they're not trying to shape their careers to be justices. They're trying to shape their careers to be the best damn judges that we can have out there and the fairest judges that we have out there in the country. Being a justice on the Supreme Court should be something that is a reward for doing good work in the judicial system, not something that you necessarily strive for. With all of the ideas that are getting thrown around out there, we've got a lot of debate to look forward to, and hopefully we get some good policy out of people being more participatory in government as a result of wanting to see the Supreme Court be the best Supreme Court that it can be. And I really don't see any reason that Kavanaugh will not be confirmed as a justice. I wish him Godspeed in his journey, and I hope that he has the best life of interpretation of the law that he can possibly have. What do you think about term limits for the Supreme Court, and what do you think about the method in which we put people onto the Supreme Court? I always welcome a thoughtful and positive discussion in the comment section below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. Thanks as always for listening to this show and supporting this channel. And remember, never take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Take care, everyone.